Good day, Nigeria. On today's newspaper review, we'll start with the First Daily. On the front page of the First Daily newspaper, there are so many headlines on the newspaper, but we'll just take few of the headlines. The lead page in the newspaper is Bloodbath in Kogi as gunmen storm community, adopt over 30 residents. This is a very sad news, and it's not always pleasant when we come and we see all this kind of report where gunmen adopt over 30 residents in Kogi State. Then on top of the newspaper, before season 11 begins, this particular one is on Big Brother Niger Entertainment, with their reunion. So before season 11 begins, BB Niger season 10 housemates gather to settle old scores. So all the old housemates in Big Brother House Niger season 10 housemates are gathering to settle their old scores, and those ones that step on each other's toes, they are gathering to settle the scores before the season 11 actually begins. Still in the newspaper, Kwankwaso denies protest plan, urges Nigerians to use ballot box. This is regards to the 2027 general election, where Rabbi Musa Kwankwaso is urging Nigerians to make use of the ballot box because this time around their votes will count. INEC intensifies voter education ahead of Osun 2026 poll. Osun State is having their 2026 election, and the INECs are educating voters on how to make use of their ballot box and not sell their votes. Then Oyo school adoption, Tinubu orders massive rescue mission. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has ordered over 1,000 forest guards into the adoption of Oyo school principal and some of the students that were involved. Then gunmen killed 2 police officers in Anambra ambush. This is very sad, where gunmen overpower police officers. Wike apologizes over cattle roaming Abuja street. Cattle are roaming in Abuja street, and the Federal Capital Territory Minister Nyesom Wike has actually apologized for the inconveniences that these cattle are causing. Moving away from that particular newspaper to the blueprints. On the blueprints cover page, there are a lot of headlines, interesting stories there, but we'll take few of the headlines. Ex-SGF Babachia Lawal dumps ADC. Atiku kicks as party sinks deeper. I hope the ADC is not sinking into another party crisis. And then on business, easing global oil prices may weaken Nigeria's economic growth. Easing global oil prices may weaken Nigeria's economic growth. You get the full story on page 30 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, CBN moves to reduce cash outside banks to 40%. CBN moves to reduce cash outside banks to 40%. You get the full story on page 8 of the newspaper. DSS snaps 2 foreigners, 3 others linked to Papiri school kidnap. You get the full story on page 8 of the newspaper. We'll move away from that newspaper to the Punch. Boldly written on the newspaper, there are so many headlines on the Punch newspaper, and then boldly written on that particular newspaper, school adoption. This is actually appearing again in regards to the Oyo school adoption, where the school teachers and the principals and students were also adopted in the process. There's a protest in Oyo State, Ogun, as National Union of Teachers begins a nationwide rally today. So the NUT are beginning their nationwide rally today. You get the full story on page 2 of the newspaper. This is very sad, where our educational system is actually failing. At the top of the newspaper, NCDC launches 21-day Ebola watch for exposed travelers. You get the full story on page 7 of the newspaper. Ebola virus is back again, and this time around the NCDC are actually launching a 21-day watch for those who are coming in and going out of Nigeria. On page 9 as well, petrol price soars 643% in 3 years. Just in 3 years, petrol price has skyrocketed to 643%. Still in the same newspaper, this is on politics as well. 2027 polls, CBN targets 2.83 trillion naira cash in private hands. You get the full story on page 24 of the newspaper. Then at the bottom, which is the foot of the newspaper, by the right of the newspaper, Nigeria's blackout persists despite $3.8 billion World Bank loan. This is on report. Get the full story on page 24 of the newspaper. According to reports, Nigeria's blackout persists despite $3.6 billion World Bank loan. Still in the same newspaper on page 7 as well, federal government scraps 3-month terminal leave for civil servants. So civil servants will no longer go for 3 months leave any longer, because the federal government has scrapped that 3-month terminal leave out. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Monitor, a lot of stories are in this particular newspaper, but the lead page of the newspaper, Orire adoption, NUT declares indefinite strike in Oyo. This is very sad, where the Nigerian Union of Teachers, they've declared an indefinite strike because of the adoption that took place in Oyo State. This is a very sad one. Education is being shut down. You know, in a country where educational system is failing, I mean, what then becomes of the country? Still in the same newspaper, court delivers judgment in Owo church attack case on Wednesday. You get the full story on page 4 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, Abia doctor threatens indefinite strike over surgeon's adoption. You get the full story on page 5 of the newspaper. A surgeon that has been adopted in Abia State, the doctors are threatening indefinite strike over the adoption. I mean, if these doctors go on strike, what then becomes the fate of the patients in the hospital? I think the governor of Abia State really needs to look into this case. At the foot of the newspaper, Nigerian Navy at 70. Congratulations to Nigerian Navy. Tinubu commends Navy for continental leadership. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has commended the Navy for their continental leadership. So congratulations to the Nigerian Navy on their 70th year anniversary. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Sun. On top of the newspaper, where we have a lot of headlines in the newspaper on the front page, but the lead page says bloodbath in Plateau, Anambra, Kogi and Niger. A lot of crises are happening in Plateau, Anambra and Kogi and in Niger State. You get the full story on page 4 and page 27 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, ADC primary, Babachir Lawal resigns, accuses party Atiku of manipulating presidential primary. You get the full story on page 27 of the newspaper. I mean, if these ADC are really manipulating their results, because initially they kicked against consensus and primary. They wanted to do the primary in the usual way, where candidates get to pick who their presidential bearer will be, but then because of the manipulation of the primary results, which made Atiku the flag bearer of that particular party. Still in the same newspaper, Oyo adoption. This particular story is resurfacing again. We saw it in our previous paper, and then it's coming again on the Daily Sun. Oyo adoption. Public schools grounded as teachers comply with strike. You get the full story on page 6 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, Wike mocks opposition over primary crisis in parties. Wike mocks opposition over primary crisis in parties. You get the full story on page 26 of the newspaper. The FCT minister is at it again. Then on page 27 of the newspaper as well, Delta leaders threaten to drag INEC chairman to NJC alleged external interference in delineation crisis. I mean, INEC is supposed to be neutral and non-partisan, not interfering in any party crisis. Their job is just to focus on the election and ensure that election goes on free and fair. But in this scenario, we are seeing INEC interfering in every party crisis. We'll move away from that particular newspaper to the Vanguard. A lot of stories are in this Vanguard, but we'll take few of the headlines. On page 5 of the newspaper, protest rocks Oyo Ogun over adoption of teachers and students. Protest rocks Oyo Ogun over adoption of teachers and students. Recall the adoption of Oyo's community teacher that was adopted 18 days ago on the 15th of May 2026, and now the Oyo State teachers and Ogun State, they are going on a strike and protest as well. At the top of the newspaper, CBN unveiled payment system vision for 2028. You get the full story to know what this vision from the CBN is about. You get the full story on page 19 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, coming from the defense headquarters, we are working to rescue kidnapped retired Major General Abubakar. Defense headquarters are saying that they are working to rescue the kidnapped and retired Major General Abubakar. What then happens to the teachers that we adopted in Oyo State if they are working so hard, so tirelessly to rescue the retired general? What happens to the teachers? What happens to the students that we adopted? Aren't they human beings too? Minister of Defense should actually do his work and not be biased in this scenario. Still in the same newspaper, caught terrorists arms supply and attacks, say northern Nigerians. Northern Nigerians are saying that they should cut terrorist arms supply and attacks. You get the full story on page 8 of the newspaper. Perhaps those that are supplying these bandits arms, ammunition and the rest, the northern Christians are saying that they should cut them of those supply of those equipments. Still in the same newspaper, by the rights of the newspaper, Saraki versus Turaki, PDP crisis escalates in Kwara, produces 2 governor candidates. You get the full story on page 29 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, on the foreign scene, Middle East war, Iran suspends talks with US over Israeli attack in Lebanon. You get the full story on page 9 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, adoption, Oshun calls emergency meeting over border school safety. You get the full story on page 8 of the newspaper. To get the full story and to continue reading this headline, you get this newspaper and then you get the full story on the newspaper. We'll move away from that particular newspaper to the Nation. On the lead page of the newspaper, Babachir Lawal says Atiku is not fit or proper to be president, that Atiku is not fit to be president. Recall that Babachir Lawal has resigned, and he is saying that Atiku Abubakar is not fit to be president. You get the full story on page 2 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper on page 2 as well, widest circulating newspaper, it says alleged $2 billion debt saga. Next Oil wins at Supreme Court. Still in the same newspaper, Tribunal orders removal of premium pension directors over PEP status. You get the full story on page 17 of the newspaper. We'll move away from that newspaper to the Leadership newspaper. On the lead page, it says bandit adopt 30 in Kogi, attack mosques in Kaduna, kidnap worshippers. You get the full story on page 4 of the newspaper. The bandits are at it again, where they adopt 30 people in Kogi State, and then they attack mosques in Kaduna and also kidnap worshippers there. At the top of the newspaper on page 6, on politics 2027, Wike rules out Jonathan's candidacy, knocks Obi Kwankwaso and Atiku. The FCT minister is at it again. He has ruled out former President Goodluck Jonathan candidacy from the PDP, and then he knocks Obi and Kwankwaso and Atiku as well. Then on page 6 of the newspaper as well, Babachia dumps ADC trade words with Atiku over primaries. Still in the same newspaper, workers shut down NUPRC operations over training dispute. You get the full story on page 25 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, this is coming from the Vice President Shetima. Tinubu building economy where ideas becomes wealth. Wow, kudos to the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. You get the full story on page 7 of the newspaper. The Vice President says that Tinubu is building economy where ideas becomes wealth. We'll wait for the outcome of this ideas that will eventually become wealth in Nigeria. Then at the foot of the newspaper on page 7, this is actually appearing again. Oyo school adoption protests rock Ibadan as teachers begin strike. Protests rock Ibadan as teachers begin strike. We'll move away from that newspaper to the Daily Trust. Boldly written on page 2 of the newspaper, cholera kills 40 in Borno. This is very sad, where disease is killing so many people in Borno State. Still in the same newspaper, Abuja motorists battle flooded street as rain setting. Get the full story on page 4 of the newspaper. This is what the FCT minister Nyesom Wike is supposed to be doing, tackling this flood in the streets of Abuja, and not throwing punch and tantrums at his fellow politician. At the bottom of the newspaper, bandit leader contacts adopted general's family. The general that has been kidnapped by this bandits, they've contacted his family and they seek release of members. At the bottom of the newspaper on page 7, windstorm, rain destroy 400 houses, schools in Zamfara, Plateau and Kogi State. Still in the same newspaper, questions over Chinda's position as minority leader, APC governorship candidate. You get the full story on page 4 of the newspaper. Recall that Kingsley Chinda is the governorship aspirant in Rivers State under the APC, and people are questioning his position as a minority leader. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Independent. On the Daily Independent, on the lead page, CBN eyes near zero fraud, 90% financial inclusion. At the top of the newspaper, troops rescue 23 kidnapped victims, recover vehicles after Kogi attack. Kudos to our Nigerian military. Still in the same newspaper on page 6, how Dangote refinery listing will reshape African's market. You get the full story on page 6 of the newspaper. Then on page 6 of the newspaper as well, ADC presidential primaries, Hayatuddin rules out legal battle. Recall that Hayatuddin and former Rivers State Governor Rotimi Amechi allegedly say that the ADC presidential primary was rigged, and perhaps Hayatuddin took the case to court, but now he's coming out to rule out the case, meaning that they have accepted their fate. Still in the same newspaper, aircraft leasing firm to tackle flight delays, lower fares coming from the federal government. The federal government says that aircraft leasing firm to tackle flight delays and lower fares. You get the full story on page 14 of the newspaper. At the bottom on page 7, NUPRC assures oil production stable despite Penkazan strike. We've come to the end of the newspaper review. Many thanks for watching and do have a beautiful day.